So when we're talking about this place, if we're zooming in for a moment, you're going to see the microbes, you're going to see the gut barrier, and then you're going to see the immune system. They're all right there. And if we want to elevate these three things, the microbes, the barrier, and the immune system, fermented foods and fiber, that is the way to go. Those two things.
Welcome to Radical Vitality, a podcast dedicated to helping you find more health, joy, and radical vitality in body and mind, despite the challenges of modern life. I'm your host, Kanchan Koya, a PhD in biomedical sciences turned cookbook author, health and nutrition coach, and passionate advocate of the use of spices, functional foods, nutrition, and lifestyle for better health. Join me and top experts in women's health as we navigate what has become an all too complicated landscape when it comes to health and wellness, so we can get down to what really matters so you can enjoy that life of radical vitality you so deserve. Now, on to today's episode. My guest today is Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, also known as the Gut Health MD on social media, or sometimes Dr. B. Dr. Bulsiewicz is a board-certified, award-winning gastroenterologist and the New York Times bestselling author of Fiber Fueled and the Fiber Fueled Cookbook. Dr. Bulsiewicz is a graduate of Georgetown University School of Medicine and was chief medical resident at Northwestern Memorial Hospital and chief gastroenterology fellow at the University of North Carolina Hospitals. Dr. B has authored more than 20 articles in top gastroenterology journals, and his work has been highlighted internationally by leading media outlets. If you don't follow him on social media, you should right away, because he's a treasure trove of knowledge, science, and most importantly, actionable steps to really take your gut health to the next level so you can thrive. Without further ado, on to today's episode. Dr. B, Will, welcome to Radical Vitality.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I have interviewed you before for this podcast when it was called Mom Light many years ago. And I was just saying to you before I hit record that I've heard you on so many podcasts, some seriously major ones and so many others. And I always listen to any podcast you're on because I really truly feel like every time I listen to you, I learn something new. And I have no doubt, even though you've been on this show before in its previous iteration, that my audience is going to learn something new and some really valuable stuff. So thank you for being here.
I mean, that coming from you, that is so nice, and it means a lot, because all that respect that I'm feeling coming from you right now, it is like right back at you. I think that you're the best. I think you're incredible. I think you're brilliant, and I'm very grateful to be here.
Thanks, Will. Okay, so I'm going to start with the most obvious question, or almost like a dumb question. There's no dumb questions, but question that sounds kind of dumb, but I do feel like your response will be instructive and can really shape people's perspective. And so the question is, why should folks prioritize their gut health?
The world has changed. I'm sure we've all noticed this. And one of the things that's changed is the science. This is a transformative moment, because there's so much about the way that our body works that we incompletely understood. And what's filled in the gap and allowed us to actually take a picture that was once blurry and start to bring it into clarity is this new science of the microbiome. And the reason why this is so important is that this is like a command center for human health. And when we think about the gut, it would be natural to immediately think about digestion, which makes sense. And I'm a gastroenterologist. That's my area of expertise and interest. But I want the listeners to also think about metabolism and the immune system and hormones and mood and brain health and all of these different aspects that are so absolutely critical to human health that actually are directed back to our gut. And it's like you can't imagine the body in the way that we imagined it 20 years ago anymore. Once you have this new information, there's just no going back. The entire world has to incorporate this aspect, which is these gut microbes. They are central to our health.
Yeah, that's such a great response. The command center for our health, way beyond just digestion. And really, like you said, the science is showing that gut health is linked to seemingly disconnected aspects of health, like mood and immune system regulation. And like my son, for example, struggles with eczema. And all I think about all day is how can I improve his gut health? How can I improve his gut health? Because we know that there's a link between skin health and gut health too, right?
My son struggled with the exact same thing, and I've talked actually to quite a few parents about this issue. Now, let me be the first to say, first of all, I'm not a pediatric gastroenterologist. I'm not a pediatrician in any way. I'm a gastroenterologist for adults, and I'm a dad. But when my son was struggling with this issue, and this was when he was an infant, it's quite fascinating. We put him on a probiotic, and he was about 6 months old. We had, by the way, tried everything, steroid creams, everything. We put him on a probiotic, and by 3 days later, the eczema was completely gone. Now, by the way, for the listeners at home, and I am in no way promising miracles here,
Hmm.
for the listeners at home, eczema is an allergic skin condition. And this is important to understand because allergic, that word means that the immune system is being activated in the same way that it would be for inflammation. But the difference being that we call it allergic because it is in response to something that's foreign to the body. And so, like, it could be, when you have an allergy, it could be a food allergy or it could be to a medication or whatever it may be. And in this case, the child is developing their microbiome for the first time. And in parallel, are developing their immune system. And it comes as little surprise that the gut and the immune system are intertwined because 70% of our immune system resides and exists, not just in the gut. Like the gut is the home for our immune system, but also separated by just a single layer of cells, which we call the gut barrier, that is microscopically thin and yet so important and crucial to the development of our immune system and the relationship between our gut microbes on one side and the immune cells on the other. And this is the reason why, and I think this is like really, it's a nice way for us to walk into this conversation, bigger conversation about gut health, is to say that this is just one example of how the gut is connected to so many parts of our body that you could give a 6 month old child like I did a probiotic and have a skin condition that is actually related to the immune system resolve itself in 3 days. And if I made the mistake of not giving him his probiotic for a few days, it came back. Now, is my son still on this probiotic? No. We discontinued it a long time ago because eventually things got to a place where the gut and the immune system were where they needed to be. They didn't need that extra helping hand.
Oh, wow. Would it be okay to ask what the probiotic was with the caveat that you're not a pediatrician?
Yeah, so what I would do, I'm happy to, by the way, pull the article, and perhaps what we can do is provide it in the show notes to the listeners,
Yeah.
because the probiotic that I gave him is not necessarily the probiotic that I believe would be recommended based upon 2023 to 2024 data. So I would rather pull the study and get the right one on hands before we offer that recommendation.
That is fantastic. And I think the overall kind of take home here is that a probiotic could help in that situation and really kind of underlines or reinforces this idea that the gut is doing so much more than just moving food along and this interconnectedness with so many systems in the body.
100%. And sometimes I think that probiotics are overhyped. And this story that I just told actually, to me, in a way, like makes probiotics sound a little too much like a silver bullet. What I really want the listeners to hear is that gut health is essential and it's connected to our immune system, our skin, and all these other things. Not necessarily that it's a probiotic that's the solution.
Perfect. So, along those lines, there's obviously a lot of people that struggle with their gut health and they know they're struggling. So, I recently, actually, just 2 days ago on my Instagram stories, posted an Indian yogurt drink. You may be familiar with it. It's called lassi. And it's, a yogurt drink that pretty much every Indian has had at some point. The mango lassi people that you have at Indian restaurants is not something we actually drink in India. Sorry. It is an American construct. I mean, I like it. My kids love it, but it's not something I ever had growing up in India. So in India, the lassi is often spiced and it has cumin, very often some kind of coriander or fresh cilantro. It might have a hint of fresh ginger root that's been kind of ground up with the cumin, maybe a pinch of salt or a pinch of black salt. It's a salted lassi, and it's essentially homemade yogurt because everybody makes their yogurt at home with a little bit of water, and you blend it and you drink it as a digestive aid. And I posted it on my Instagram stories because we are in the week, we're recording this in the week after Thanksgiving. And I was like, if anyone's struggling from the overindulgence of last week, this lassi might help. Literally, because I made it for myself. And my story went viral, which is funny, but I realized people are struggling. People feel the after effects, and so like going back to my question, I think there's a subset of people, a big subset, that feel overtly uncomfortable and they have gut symptoms. And I mean, as a gastroenterologist, I'm sure you've seen, a plethora of that. But I feel like, is there a way for us to assess our gut health and whether it's on point or not, or whether we could be working on it or not, even in the absence of like overt symptoms? Like, how would you know that your gut health is on point?
This is a great question, and I'm going to leave testing for last, even though most people would think the testing would come first. Because I think that like it starts with the fundamentals of being a clinician. And, we have in many ways in medicine these days lost the ability to use our minds because instead we just immediately like, what is the test? What is the MRI? What are we going to do? Right. But like, let's start with the basics. How are you pooping? I think that the bowel movement is a window into this microbial world. In the same way that if I were assessing a person's vital signs, if I was trying to understand their cardiovascular health, then I would, listen to their heart. I would get their heart rate. I would get their blood pressure. I would take a look at their respiratory rate, which gives me insights into their lung health. Right. So like those are vital signs. Well, when it comes to the gut, the vital sign is how is your bowel movement? And there's sort of two main measures that I would look at that I would say are the essentials. And then like you can get into more details than this. I mean, we could talk about poop all day if you want to, but
Part two is all about poop.
there we go. The two essentials are frequency and form. So form refers to the shape. So now with regard to frequency, the average person should be pooping at least once a day, if not more than once a day. Are you unhealthy if you poop less than once a day? No, you are not necessarily unhealthy. Different people have a different cadence, a different rhythm. Part of this, when you're pooping, is do you get a sense of complete evacuation? Do you feel like you completely empty? Do you get a sense of relief? And are you free of digestive symptoms? Because there are people who poop every day and they're constipated and they typically have gas and bloating. And they may have other digestive symptoms as well, but gas and bloating are classic for constipation. And the issue with these people is even though they're pooping every day, they should poop more. Maybe they should be twice a day. Maybe they should be 3 times a day, if they're on a high fiber diet, for example. Or they're not completely going when they go. So what they classify as a bowel movement is not, in fact, a full bowel movement. It's a partial. So these are all things to kind of think about that would provide insights into what's happening with your gut. The form, stool form. So it may sound bizarre, but there's actually a way to classify this that's universally accepted. It's called the Bristol stool scale. Now, the Bristol stool scale basically has 7 pictures. So we grade the poop from 1 to 7. Now we could share this also in the show notes.
Absolutely, we will.
Yeah, and you can take a look at this. And the questions are like, what is your typical, right? Like, what is your most common bowel movement? And how often are you getting one of these other bowel movements? Now, a number 4 is the classic healthy bowel movement, a Bristol type 4. And this is a soft but formed torpedo. So, and when we deviate from this, we can move towards 3, 2, 1. These are forms of constipation. And to put this into perspective, as you're moving from this torpedo shaped, soft formed stool, a Bristol 1, which is on the constipation spectrum, is like a rabbit pellet. It's a hard ball. And then we have variations that exist in between 2 and 3. Flip side, we can move towards 7. 7, 5, 6, and 7 are forms of diarrhea. And we're getting looser and looser as we go until you get to number 7, where it's just water, right? So every bowel movement falls on the spectrum. Now, are you unhealthy because occasionally you have something that deviates from a 4 or that your normal is like a 3.5? No, you're not unhealthy. In fact, a lot of people that eat a high fiber diet are kind of having things that are almost in that 3.5 to 4.5 range. But it's really a question of like kind of where do you stand. So to me, our bowel movements are a window into what's happening with our gut microbiome. And the reason why we know this is because if you talk about these different things that we're discussing right now, how often you go and stool form, both of these questions have been shown through studies to actually be associated with specific changes to our gut microbiome. So, in other words, you can interpret to some degree what's going on with your gut microbiome based upon what you see in the toilet bowl.
That's so empowering. And I also love it because it encourages us to get more connected with ourselves and our bodies. Like we hear a lot about listening to your body. This is literally like looking at what your body is producing, hopefully daily. And some people might cringe and be like, that's too much intimacy with my own body. But it's a reminder that if we're not listening and paying attention, we're missing some key signals. And like you said, often relying on these tests, which can be useful, but maybe the ultimate test is right there in front of us if we just kind of pay attention.
Yeah, I think we start with the basics. If I were to assess a person's gut health, the basics are how often are you pooping? What is the stool form? I would ask about symptoms. You had mentioned, like, what if a person doesn't have symptoms? So that's where the poop comes in. But I would certainly ask about symptoms. When you have digestive symptoms in response to food, particularly when it's happening chronically and it's reproducible, then we know that there's something going on there. And typically, when the gut is not in a good place, you're going to manifest symptoms. But the last thing that I would look at too is I would just look at your health history. So, like, let's pretend that we're in the clinic and I grab the chart and I flip open the chart. I haven't even walked in the door yet. I'm going to look at your past medical history. And what I'm looking for, so I want to put you into my mind so that you can kind of do this with yourself. It's an exercise. What I'm looking for is what are the conditions that are associated with gut health? So we mentioned off the top of the conversation that your gut is connected to digestion, metabolism, your immune system, your hormones, and your mood and your brain health. And it's quite common actually for a person such as myself as a gastroenterologist to review a chart and see, okay, yes, like they're here for acid reflux or they're here for irritable bowel syndrome, but they also have a history of high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. They have an autoimmune issue or allergic issues. There's a history of mood disorder. And these things are quite common. And that's because these sort of clusters, they're all kind of coming from the same root cause, which is disruption or disturbance of the microbiome.
Yeah, that's exactly the question I was going to ask. So you answered it before I asked it, which is fantastic. Which was, do you ever see patients where they'll say, "Oh, my bowel movements are just fine. Like I'm a 4," but then you notice they have these other conditions, and you're like, maybe there's more to explore here in terms of the gut health really being where it should be, or maybe they just haven't been paying attention, but there's some dysbiosis or just lack of balance or dysregulation that needs attention.
Yeah, that's exactly the case that there can be these different aspects to this. So if you think about, basically we're talking about health conditions, we're talking about your poop, and we're talking about your gut symptoms. And there can be someone who, one of those three potentially is perfectly fine and not an issue in the moment, but the other two are still there. And those by themselves are enough for us to say that there's something going on from a gut perspective. Now, what's the role of testing? Okay, so gut microbiome tests, like you can order these from home these days. You don't even have to go to your doctor to get this done. Or there are some clinicians that will actually prescribe these tests. And to be completely honest with you, the vast majority of them I don't really think are necessary. So, are they interesting? Yes. Do we have research to tell us how to take the information that we receive from these tests and apply them to your life in a way that actually is going to give you meaningful benefit? In the majority of cases, the answer is no. The reason why I don't speak in absolutes is that this will eventually come to fruition over time, that we will have gut testing that has been adequately researched in order for us to say this does this. That's where we need to go. Now, one of the hats that I wear, in addition to being an author, and in addition to all these other things, is that I'm the US medical director of a company called Zoe.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a test. It's not just a gut test. We test the microbiome. We also test blood sugar responses. We also test blood fat responses. So it's a number of different aspects. It's not just one thing. But the reason that I bring this up, and the reason why I chose to work with this company, is because the research comes before the product. So, and basically what that means is that in order for us to offer a gut test, we want to know that that gut test actually does something. So they actually ran years of clinical studies that they published in top journals prior to ever launching their product in 2020. And since 2020, we have continued to do research. We're publishing papers every single month of what we're finding and how to actually use this test. The test is really principally focused on metabolic results. There is clear evidence that exists, that I'm seeing as the medical director of this company, that like people are in fact improving their gut health by doing Zoe. So, but in terms of like what have we actually shown in studies, our strongest evidence, and the reason why I lean into this, is that it's a clinical trial.
Mm.
So, unlike almost any other company out there, we actually ran a randomized controlled trial to show that our product works. And we can go as far into those details as you want, but that would be a couple minutes of conversation about metabolism. But the bottom line is that people who do Zoe in a clinical trial, randomized controlled, people who do Zoe, they improve their blood sugar response, they improve their blood fat response, they improve their gut microbiome.
I'd love to talk about it. And before we do, I will say that I've done the Zoe test myself, and I was very fascinated by the results and felt very empowered. And, basically, in a nutshell, and I'm sure I would love for you to share the results of that study because it's super interesting. You get, just to the audience listening, you do this test, you send off a poop sample, you do a couple things they ask for, and then you get a score about, and I'm probably, forgetting some details, Will, so feel free to correct me. But essentially, what you're left with is this kind of ideal dietary pattern to follow through a very easy to use app that says, for you as an individual with these responses in terms of your gut microbiome diversity, in terms of your blood fat response, your blood sugar response, these are the foods that are optimal for you. So I love that it's bio individualized and not this sort of blanket recommendation for everyone. The foods are all whole, real, beautiful, delicious foods, and you can combine them in all kinds of exciting ways. And really, what I love about it is no food is off limits. And there's these ways in which to combine your sort of fun foods that might not be the best for your individual, say, blood sugar response, with other foods that would help bring about more balance to the way your body responds to that meal. And so I will say, when I eat the Zoe way and when I hit like a 90 score, like 5 days in a row, I literally feel like I can fly. Like I have so much energy. It really does work. And I love how it's not like super restrictive or like no foods are off limits.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I love hearing that. And those anecdotes of what you're describing basically are what was shown in this clinical trial, which is that, and you have to understand that, ultimately the people who will get the best results from our product at Zoe are the people who are like truly dedicated and motivated to actually do it.
Hmm.
Because if you don't do it, simply doing the test is not enough. Like you actually have to create change. And the product is designed to try to help facilitate that. But in essence, what we showed in this study is that if you were to compare people who are recommended to follow a Zoe pattern of diet, which is personalized, so not everyone is doing the exact same thing, versus following the standard recommendation from our government, which actually, if the majority of people in the United States did this, they would improve their health.
Mm.
So the control was not continuing your own diet. The control was elevating your diet to a better diet but following the pattern that's recommended by our government as sort of the gold standard. So in doing this, people who followed the Zoe way of eating, they improved their triglycerides levels. They actually lowered the triglyceride levels. They lost weight, by the way, where they were not restricting. In no way were they calorie counting or eliminating. If anything, it was just trying to elevate the quality of their diet. They lost more weight than those people. And then when you look at these measures that some people might say, hey, that's subjective, that's not objective. But things like energy and
Hmm.
mood, right? And sleep. Well, like I would in no way diminish the importance of these things because how you feel is very important. So with the Zoe program, people improved their energy levels, they slept better, and they improved their mood. So, and then the last thing I should mention too is they improved their gut health. But what was kind of fascinating about this is that there's always this question that exists where people say, uh, do we like is there actually truly any benefit to this program over literally just following the government recommended diet? Like why do we even need to have this option when we already can just tell people eat more fruits and vegetables? And so what we did to honestly like take a look at that, like, so what's the deal here? The way that we assessed this is to actually compare the people that were very adherent to the Zoe diet, compare them to the people who are very adherent to the government recommended diet, the standard control diet.
Mm.
If you do that, then it's like, okay, well, here are the people like they're really truly doing this with the government diet. And here's people that are really truly doing it with the Zoe way. And what we found was that the benefits were actually more intense. That
Mm.
like everything that I mentioned earlier, it was even better. It was even better the more adherent that you were. Even if you compared it to people that were very adherent to the government diet. So nonetheless, it's exciting. And yet simultaneously, this is based upon a study from we're publishing it now, but the study was done mostly in 2022. And we are a company that's constantly revising ourselves and building upon where we were before. And so the 2023 and 2024 versions of Zoe are clearly superior. If we were to reconduct the exact same study, the results would be even better from my perspective.
Well, I really appreciate, yeah, no, I appreciate that you shared that. And I appreciate that you led with the importance of simple measures of gut health, like, stool, the Bristol stool chart, or how you're feeling, but then also mentioning the power or utility of some of these tests with some of the caveats, and how companies like Zoe are doing, really focusing on the research guiding the way. So if you are going to, go for a test that looks at your gut microbiome, make sure it's a company like Zoe that is letting science speak first before the hype.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't. It's not my expectation that Zoe's the only company or option that exists. But your question should be, what studies do you have to support your product? And if they don't have an answer, then we have a problem.
100%. So now that we have clearly established that gut health is critical, it's the central command center, you said. I love that. I'm going to keep that in my head. For our overall health, what are some really simple things people can start doing literally today to improve their gut health? And how long will it take for them to see any kind of positive change?
Well, the exciting and beautiful thing about the gut is that it is constantly changing and it is changing very quickly. The superpower of these microbes is their ability to evolve and adapt. No matter what happens, whether it be our diet or whether it be some sort of massive change on the planet, these microbes will rapidly evolve and adapt much quicker than we're capable of doing as humans, which is part of the reason why our relationship with them is so beneficial because when we need something to change, they can do the changing for us. So when you change your diet, the research has shown us that within 24 hours, there already are changes underway within your microbiome.
Mm.
It's a snowball effect. And that snowball, it starts quite small and it will grow bigger over time. And along that path, it could lose momentum or it could backtrack depending on what you're doing with your diet. So if you make a change for one day, you're not going to get very far. This is why consistency is very important. If you can be consistent with the changes that you make, no matter what the change is, If you can be consistent about it, then you will start to reinforce it and your gut will adapt to it. And by the way, this is like to me a quite a proven phenomenon because one of the things that you can do, believe it or not, is to drink tea or drink coffee. Now, I'm not here to say that this is necessarily for everyone, but if you were to look at the strongest associations that exist between gut microbes and dietary choices, the strongest associations that exist actually are between coffee and gut microbes. There are specific microbes that love coffee. This is not because coffee is superior to every other choice out there.
Hmm.
The reason why this is happening is because number one, yes, coffee does affect your microbiome. But number two, more importantly, people who drink coffee, they do it every day.
Hmm.
Whatever you do, if you can do it every day, it will change your gut. So, what are some simple changes that I would suggest? No matter
I
who
just
you
want to
are.
jump in before
Mm,
you go on that I have my matcha right here. And it's in my fancy Japanese matcha cup that was whisked with my Japanese bamboo. I do not skip my matcha. I have coffee too. I have one coffee and one matcha, just for anyone interested. But I'm going to attribute my gut microbiome diversity on my Zoe score to my tea drinking and coffee drinking habit.
Let me say, coffee is not necessary for everyone. There's some people who are super caffeine sensitive. If my wife has a cup of coffee after noon, like she's up all night. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Big coffee drinker. I'm a huge coffee drinker. I've probably had 3 or 4 cups of coffee so far today. I'm also a big tea drinker. I like my matcha in the afternoon. It's my afternoon pick me up. I actually already had my matcha prior to our conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also a huge chai fan. So now
Mm.
I'm going to apologize because I'm trying very, very, very hard in front of you, Kanchan, to not use the words chai and tea in the same sentence because then
I
it would be like
already
saying tea.
appreciate it deeply. Thank you for saying just chai. Yes,
Just
perfect.
chai, right? Because chai means tea. But,
Yes.
the beauty of the dietary patterns that exist within India is the variety of spices, whether that be with tea or whether that be with the lassi or whether that be with the curry or whatever food it is that you're cooking. It's the variety of spices that are so good for the gut. And and with that in mind, variety, right?
Mm.
Including spices, but just period. Variety is essential. No matter who you are, no matter what dietary pattern you follow, I would encourage you, if there's only one thing you take away from this conversation, let it be this: that you focus on adding more variety, specifically more plant variety. All spices, of course, are plants. Add more plant variety to your diet, to your life, because when we do that, we are basically getting all of the different colors, polyphenols. Polyphenols are antioxidant compounds you find in plants, all the different types of fiber, all the different vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals. Phytochemicals are chemicals that, like many of them, have been turned into pharmaceuticals that come from plants. Every single plant has a unique mix of these things. And when you eat a diverse mix of plants, you are getting a little bit of everything. And that's what your microbiome loves. Your microbiome loves a little bit of everything, variety. So that's where I would start.
Yeah. I mean, most Americans are definitely not getting enough variety. I would say, like, I don't know what this statistic is or if anyone studied this, but I just notice observationally that most people buy kind of the same handful of vegetables at the grocery store. Those are the ones that are always stocked, and they're good. They're great starting points. I love cucumbers, tomatoes, carrots. Okay, great. But can we go beyond that? Can we add a lentil? Can we add a bean? Can we add dandelion greens that are in my fridge? I mean, that's my mission, is like, can we get people to eat more variety? And you talked about consistency and how none of this is going to matter if you do it once. For me, the way to ensure consistency is to make the food delicious. Why would you not eat in a way that is delicious consistently? So instead of thinking about these changes as like some sort of chore, incorporating them into your meals and really making them delicious with the spices and herbs and simple cooking techniques, you're going to be like, I want to eat this way like every day.
You speak in my language. I feel the exact same way.
So that's amazing. Add more variety of plant foods. Drink coffee and tea if coffee works for you. Is there a contraindication for coffee with something like, say, acid reflux? I get a lot of questions on my Instagram from people saying, I have heartburn. What do you advise people who enjoy coffee? They don't have a caffeine sensitivity per se, but maybe coffee irritates their GI kind of tract.
Yeah. The thing about acid reflux is that in some ways you have an advantage because you can tie your symptoms to your diet choices.
Hmm.
And when it triggers your symptoms, then you have your answer of what's going on there. And if it doesn't trigger your symptoms, then you know in the other direction, which is a beautiful thing. And the unfortunate thing, I don't enjoy having this conversation with people because the fun stuff tends to be the stuff that causes trouble for acid reflux. Caffeine is one of them. And included with caffeine, we have to throw chocolate in there because actually chocolate has caffeine.
Hmm.
So, but beyond that, other stuff, fried food, fatty foods, spicy foods, acidic foods, peppermint can be problematic. Of course, alcohol and tobacco. So yes, so it's quite common for coffee to be problematic for people. What is the solution for a person to acid reflux symptoms with coffee? Well, part of this is that we could reduce the amount of caffeine. Part of this is that you can neutralize it with some variety of milk. Like, for example, I would use a plant milk.
Hmm.
If I were to, I don't typically, I usually drink my coffee black, but if I were to add a plant milk to this, the one that I personally would choose would be a nice organic soy milk.
Hmm. Same.
And the reason being that the protein, so soy milk has a lot more protein than the other choices, like compared to oat milk or almond milk. The protein content is high, and that protein content really helps to cut the acid.
Mm.
And you'll notice that a lot of the acidity is gone when you add soy milk to coffee. So that's something that you could do. The most important thing is to really focus on healing your gut. And with acid reflux, a couple quick things. If you add more fiber to your diet, if you eat a more plant-based diet, and if you reduce caffeine and alcohol and drink more water, you will improve acid reflux. And after your body heals, because it heals, it grows stronger. And when it's stronger, then you can start to slowly add back the coffee and you may be able to tolerate it one cup at a time.
Love that. Super empowering. And I will make a plug for your course on acid reflux that I took because I actually struggled with some acid reflux during my graduate days when I was doing my PhD, and the stress of like lab stuff and drinking way too much coffee, the combination of those two things. And I was able to heal from it. So it doesn't have to be a permanent condition. The body has this infinite ability to heal if you provide the right microenvironment. And what I loved about your course, which I believe is on your page, and we can link to that in the show notes, people can still access that content.
Yeah, it's evergreen. So what that means is like you could be in Australia in the middle of the night and do it. I could be sleeping.
Yeah, it was a brilliant seminar and great like handouts and resources. So anyone struggling with acid reflux that really wants to go deep and not just do the band-aid solution and really understand how to heal the root cause so that you can enjoy your coffee eventually, I will link to that course in the show notes. But I love those tips. I want to talk about a couple of foods just along those lines to wrap up that question of what people can do. I love the takeaways; they're super actionable. What are some things that you do every single day or eat, let's say, consistently that are like just kind of habituated at this point that you are doing to support your gut health as someone so knowledgeable in the space? And of course, you said like tea and coffee and plant variety. Any other special foods or things that you do to kind of just always be supporting your gut?
Yeah. So of course I prioritize plant-based meals. These are high in fiber. They're high in plant diversity. I try to get more fermented food, which we could unpack if you like. There's some really interesting research that's been happening in this space of fermented food in the last few years. But what is the thing that I do rather consistently that I think is great for my gut? So there's a couple things going on with the world these days. One is that everyone in America, or almost everyone in America, is fiber deficient. 95% of Americans are fiber deficient. We could use more fermented food, and we could also use more polyphenols. Polyphenols are the I mentioned a little bit earlier the antioxidant compounds that you find in plants that are basically anti-inflammatory. It's possible to combine these things into a simple to consume beverage that actually I find to be delicious. So here's what I do. I take chia seeds. Now I think chia seeds are magical because they are high in fiber. They're high in omega-3 fats, which are the healthy fats that, frankly, much like fiber, we need more of. And they also have this unique capacity to absorb water that creates a certain sort of texture. And
Mm-hmm.
depending on how much water you add, it could be like pudding or it could just be like a slightly thickened beverage. So I typically will take 2 tablespoons of chia seeds. That's about 10 grams of fiber right there. And I will add it to a spice grinder to just kind of open them up. All right. That gives my body better access to the omega 3s. And I'll put this into a mason jar, a little bit of ice, not a ton of ice, just a little bit of ice. I put a gram of matcha green tea, squeeze a lemon, and a splash of apple cider vinegar with the mother, of course. And then I just add water, probably add 16 to 20 ounces of water, and I stir it up. And so in that beverage, I have probiotic microbes, I've got fiber, I've got polyphenols, I've got omega-3 fats, and like actually it's quite delicious and easy for me to do.
Oh my gosh, brilliant. And I'm going to have to make a video showing people how to do that and tag you because that is going to have to be something I try. Will, how do you feel about this trend just speaking of apple cider vinegar where people are literally having shots of apple cider vinegar like before before they eat like a carbohydrate because they don't want a blood glucose spike?
Yeah, so vinegar will help to blunt the blood glucose spike. This is very well established. It doesn't have to be apple cider vinegar in order to do that, nor does it need to be a fermented food. I'm more of a fan of the fermented food aspect. This is why I like it with the mother.
Mhm.
There's other forms of vinegar that have the live microbes, by the way, but they have to put onto the bottle if they do. And I don't love the idea of it being a shot. I think that that's caustic to your teeth. I also think it's caustic to your esophagus.
Mhm.
To me, I think you're better off taking that shot and adding some water and turning into a beverage that's more on the spectrum of kombucha. So when I drink kombucha, I always add water to it. Like even kombucha, I think it's a little too acidic.
Amazing. Great tips. Along the lines of food, so we talked about the benefits of a plant-based diet, the plant variety, the different prebiotics, the fiber, the polyphenols. A lot of people eat an omnivorous diet. They might eat a lot of plants, but they might also eat animal products. And something that I am seeing in the landscape right now, because I think I always feel like these things kind of cycle. And right now, the trend, especially in women's health and women in their 40s, which, I am, protein. Everyone is like, oh my gosh, are you hitting your protein targets? And that's the only thing that matters. And we need to, we need protein, we need to preserve muscle loss. And I get the importance of those things. And I think oftentimes because we get so fixated on trying to optimize this one thing, we might actually be trading off other aspects of our health because we're never only optimizing one aspect of our health. And what I am concerned about is this obsession now with meeting your protein needs, which I think is important. But then is that having deleterious consequences on our gut microbes because people are really leaning into, say, animal protein as their protein source of choice? Because you'll hear a lot of things on social media about how that's a more optimal protein, it's more bioavailable, it's better quality. So are we sort of putting ourselves into a little bit of a pickle, pun intended, with this hyper focus on protein and especially animal protein when it comes to our gut health?
Well, protein isn't bad. Protein is good and it's important. But I think though that sometimes we have to take a step back and look at the big picture and assess the lay of the land and ask questions like, does this make sense? So the average American in the United States consumes 100 grams of protein per day, and they weigh about 70 kilos. So if we start to do the math on this ends up being over 1.4 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day.
Mhm.
That's not that's not an excessive amount of protein necessarily, but It's at least enough for the vast majority of people who are not physically active, at least enough.
Hmm.
If we take a look around, like, is there evidence of protein deficiency in our society? I would say no. Are there people who are protein deficient? Yes. But those people are rare. And typically it's in association with a serious medical condition. So, and we could go down the line of, it could be an eating disorder, it could be a digestive disorder like Crohn's disease, or it could be something like cancer, right? That's a unique example, a unique situation. That's not the typical person who has access to a grocery store and doesn't have some sort of serious health condition holding them back. So I don't, in a way, understand the obsession with the protein when we
Mm.
don't actually have a protein problem from my perspective. What we have is a fiber problem. And I don't mean to be that guy, but the truth is, like, let's actually just take a step back for a moment and think about this. First of all, I've told you 95% of people in the United States are deficient in fiber. All right, so that is the statistic, but like, does this actually manifest with problems, right? Do we see people having more health issues as a result of this? I would, like, without a shadow of a doubt, answer yes to that question. First of all, think of all the digestive health problems that exist across our country. Literally 40 to 50% of Americans have a digestive health condition,
Hmm.
and they're all associated with a deficiency of fiber. And even for those that don't have a digestive health condition, there is a huge percentage of people that experience at least some level of constipation, which would be sort of the classic thing, or food intolerance, or the inability to tolerate fiber
Hmm.
because they're not adequately consuming this food. But it's not just a digestive health thing. Now, digestive health to me is very important because this is quality of life, and your quality of life matters. You should feel good. But it's also about longevity, right? Can we protect ourselves from the diseases, the health conditions that threaten our life the most? And so if we think about, like, what are the top killers? Number one is heart disease. Number two is cancer. And in the top 10, we have stroke and diabetes and Alzheimer's and chronic kidney disease. And all six of these things that I just mentioned are conditions of lifestyle. It is not to say that the only reason that you get these conditions is because the choices that you make. No, there clearly are other aspects to this, but there's a reason why these conditions have been on the rise in the 20th and 21st century. And when we go to the evidence, so here are the conditions on the rise. Again, heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and chronic kidney disease. And when we go to the evidence is clear that people who consume a high fiber diet are at lower risk for these exact six health conditions. So to me, like, we're talking about protein, but how can we tie this to our health related issues in the United States? How can you tell me that we have health related issues because of protein deficiency? There's no evidence of this. But what I am saying is that there is clear evidence, both from a digestive health perspective and simultaneously in terms of longevity and our ability to protect ourselves from the top causes of disease and death in the United States. Fiber is causing trouble for us. So I wish that we could refocus towards fiber. And the thing about it from my perspective, Kanchan, is that I'm not actually saying to you that you need to cut your protein. I didn't say that.
Hmm.
I'm saying we need to raise our fiber. And there's ways in which you can get both. And we're just quite simply not doing it. We can elevate our dietary quality. People who elevate their dietary quality reduce their risk of all of these conditions. And high quality diets include protein and fulfill your protein needs. But when you consume, for example, you mentioned lentils, which I love, and other legumes and whole grains, these things have protein too. And they're amazing sources of fiber. So you can have your cake and eat it too. You can get your protein and simultaneously protect yourself from these serious health conditions.
100%. And I shared this recently with my audience that I I do follow an omnivorous dietary pattern that's very plant forward. And I actually did add more animal protein to my foods. And then when I did some blood work, my ApoB was trending in the wrong direction. Because whether you like it or not, a lot of these animal foods do come with other properties, often saturated fat, which will raise your LDL cholesterol and increase your risk of the number one killer, which is cardiovascular disease. So don't focus on one thing and let the most important things go out the window. We are always optimizing for more than one thing. So that's why I'm always saying, like, okay, if you eat animal foods, that's fine, but don't forget to incorporate those plant based protein sources that give you the protein and the fiber, like double win.
I completely agree. And if we took the lay of the land right now and people did not reduce their animal product consumption at all, you ate the exact same thing, but you replaced ultra processed foods with plant foods, whole plant foods. If you did that by itself, people would be far more healthy. So it doesn't necessarily have to require this compromise. That being said, we do know the fiber content of animal products is zero. And when we have a fiber crisis, we should be looking to find foods that can get both of these things done, give us our protein and our fiber at the same time.
Love that. I have so much to cover. I'm going to have to bring you back on for part three because part one is something that we already did. And I'm going to link to that because we covered so many interesting topics in that first conversation about what the gut microbiome is, how to build tolerance to foods that cause gas and bloating like beans. So I'll link to that. So many great nuggets there. I do want to talk about fiber. You talked about how we need to focus on fiber. And I feel like what I'm seeing is a lot of fiber being added to processed foods. So, like energy bars, drinks, is it enough to just eat more fiber? Or obviously, we want to pay attention to the quality of that fiber and the types of fiber that we're ingesting and the variety.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the rules of engagement here are pretty clear at this point. We need to like make our fiber come predominantly from our diet. And by diet, that doesn't mean the powdered fiber that was added to the ultra processed food. Like that's not real. So to me, eating whole plant foods in variety, getting enough of that. And then I do think that there's a place. I mean, I would be remiss as a gastroenterologist when like literally 95% of my patients were basically getting the recommendation to add fiber supplements. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I do think that there's a place for fiber supplements that can have tremendous benefit for people that go above what the diet does for you. But at the same time, I think that it's like we have to understand you can't out supplement a bad diet. You have to work on your dietary quality, get most of your fiber from your diet, and then there's a role for supplements to boost beyond that.
So, we've talked about food, its impact on the gut microbes, how you can quickly change the composition of your microbiome literally in hours, days, which is just incredibly powerful. I wanted to touch upon a couple of other lifestyle habits or practices and whether or not they impact the gut microbiome. So, the first that comes to mind is exercise, movement. Is there any evidence that moving, exercising, just, engaging in some sort of physical activity can benefit our gut health?
100%. I don't think it comes as a big shock, but I think the part that's quite shocking to me is the way in which it works. Because once again, nature is so intelligent and it makes so much sense. So, first of all, there's evidence that people who, for example, do strength training and they lift weights, there is a shift in the microbiome that takes place. You basically get a microbiome that produces more short chain fatty acids.
Mm.
Short chain fatty acids are the most anti inflammatory compounds that I've ever come across. We get more of them by consuming a high fiber diet. But what I'm telling you now is you can also get more of them through exercise, or you can multiply that whole thing and like make it all synergize by combining a high quality diet that's high in fiber with exercise at the same point. Why would our body want more short chain fatty acids if we're doing exercise? Well, it helps with recovery.
Hmm.
So short chain fatty acids actually go to the muscle and they have an effect there in terms of helping because they're anti-inflammatory. So they help in terms of our muscle recovery that we get. And they also protect muscle mass. So there are benefits to incorporating this if you are doing strength training. But then the quite fascinating part is that there are also specific microbial changes that take place in people that are distance runners. As an example, they studied the microbiome of marathon runners and discovered that they had a specific microbe that was known to break down lactic acid, which I find fascinating because lactic acid is what causes muscle fatigue. And if you are an endurance runner, you need to break down lactic acid so that you have less muscle fatigue, so that you can run longer and farther. And actually, the microbiome helps to facilitate that. Now, between these two findings, recognizing that the findings are not exactly the same, much like I recommend a diversity of different plants in your diet, I also recommend that you switch things up and mix up your exercise routine. Don't always do the same thing, do something different because it will have a different effect on your gut.
Variety is key, even when it comes to exercise, just like with the dietary pattern. I love that. Intermittent fasting, very, very popular still. Many people will say change their lives to have a more restricted eating window or to practice kind of consistent, like weekly fasts. Is there any evidence that intermittent fasting can have benefits or not on gut health?
There's evidence that intermittent fasting can have benefits on gut health. Our microbes, they're little workers and they're much like us. So it's not really fair to them to ask them to work 24 hours a day when we're not really capable of doing that ourselves. And I can
Mm.
tell you firsthand, having worked 30-hour shifts in the hospital, that the last 6 hours, probably even a little bit more than that, of that work, I was a fraction of myself and my intelligence and sharpness and ability to do my job. So, and the same is true of these microbes. If we give them a break, and honestly, the best time or best way to give them a break, I think, is on the back end of our day by having dinner and then like shutting it down for the night and not having any late night snacks, but also not having any late night drinks like alcohol.
Hmm.
And by doing that, you can give yourself like pretty easily, you can give yourself 12 hours of fasting, even if you have breakfast when you wake up. So, and anything that you do beyond 12 hours is when the microbiome starts to really make a shift. If you give it a 12-hour break, anything beyond that is just a little added bonus. If you choose to skip breakfast, so be it. If you choose to be 2 meals a day, so be it. But even just by having dinner and then enforcing this rule, nothing after dinner, that by itself could make a huge difference. And by the way, for those of you who have a device, wearable that gives you feedback on where your body is at, pay attention to this. Pay attention to what happens if you have dinner and then nothing else after dinner and what that does to your heart rate variability and your resting heart rate overnight. I think what you're going to find is you have a lower resting heart rate and a higher heart rate variability as a result of this choice.
Are there any negative effects to very long fasts? Like, I know most people aren't engaging in those, but I know some people are where they're doing weekly, say 36-hour fast or even 24-hour fast. I mean, is there a point at which it's no longer beneficial or potentially even harmful to the gut microbiome?
There definitely is a point. I don't have a specific number, and I think it probably varies based upon the individual person, to be totally honest with you. But it's very clear that there is a point in which this actually becomes harmful. And the reason why I say this is that our gut barrier, I mentioned earlier in the very beginning, the single layer of cells. And it's important to understand that if you were to zoom in and take a look at this area, it's more than just a single layer of cells. There's something over the top of it called the mucus layer.
Hmm.
And the mucus layer is part of how we protect ourselves. And you want a plump, juicy mucus layer because the thicker that mucus layer is, the more that it's able to actually protect your body. We get a plump, juicy mucus layer through the consumption of fiber. And when we start fasting, this actually becomes the food for the microbes, the mucus layer. They start to consume it. And what you
Mm.
see is people on a low fiber diet. So, like, for example, you would get yourself into more trouble with this if you're on a low fiber diet before you start doing the long fast, right? Because you already have a depleted mucus layer. But what you see is people who are on a low fiber diet, they will start to thin out their mucus layer over time and eventually get to the point where it erodes itself away. There's nothing left. And then basically break down to the gut barrier. So the point being that long fasts, obviously you're not consuming fiber during that period of time. Long fasts can create the exact same effect as a low fiber diet.
Almost like starve the microbes of their food.
Starve the microbes of their food because there are like, if you fast for a reasonable period of time, there are microbes that like thrive in that environment, right? So no matter what choice you make, there are microbes that thrive in that environment. But imagine that those microbes that are thriving in the environment where you are fasting, the reason why they thrive is because they have the opportunity to now consume this mucus layer.
Hmm.
But when the mucus layer is gone, they starve too. So basically everyone starts starving.
Right. Too much of a good thing, basically, is, the balance is key. You talked about the gut barrier, the lining, the mucus layer. And I feel like you hear this a lot on the internet, social media. I have leaky gut. I want to heal my gut lining. I'm going to drink bone broth or take collagen supplements. But what I'm hearing you say is it's a fiber problem. So where is the disconnect there?
I think that the disconnect is, so first of all, leaky gut. If we were to like line up all of the information that exists on the internet about leaky gut, I would probably disagree with most of it.
Hmm.
That being said, the idea of leaky gut is completely true. And we can call it leaky gut, or like a more technical term would be increased intestinal permeability from breakdown of this gut barrier. It does exist. It is real. And the main consequence, above all else, is disruption of the immune system. This is the reason why people that have inflammatory issues, they all have damage to the gut barrier. This is the reason why people that have autoimmune issues, they all have damage to the gut barrier. So this is real. Now, how do we fix it? And the problem is that people misinterpret what happens when they, for example, drink bone broth. They think, oh well, this is soothing.
Hmm.
This is soothing, therefore it's fixing my problem. There is no doubt that drinking a warm beverage in the same way that you and I celebrate tea, right? Or there's a number of other warm beverages that you could do that have nothing to do with bones or broth that will give you a soothing effect. They make you feel good. There's no evidence that the bones in the broth do anything of actual value in terms of gut health. There's no evidence of this. There is no evidence that collagen supplements are beneficial to gut health that I have seen. If you find some, please send it to me. I would love to see it. But so far, I have not had anyone take me up on that offer, and I've been talking about this for years. All right, so there's no evidence of this. Now, collagen, am I saying that collagen is like completely worthless? Almost. Uh, there's like very weak evidence when it comes to skin. There's far stronger evidence for other things that we could do for our skin instead of collagen, and collagen supplements are expensive.
Right.
But, but that being said, we're talking about the gut though. So what can we do in terms of the gut? What I think that the message that I want people to hear today is that it's not the only way to fix your gut barrier, but the main way to fix your gut barrier is actually through fiber.
Hmm.
Because the stewards of our gut barrier, the people, the little workers, the builders who are constantly revising it, because you have to understand, the gut barrier isn't just built when you're born and then stay that way for the rest of your life. Every 3 days, you have a brand new gut barrier every 3 days. Like you are constantly revising yourself, right? And so, as a part of that constantly revising process, you need to have the right nutrients present, and the gut microbes are the builders that are going to help to pull it all together and give you a strong, fortified gut barrier to protect yourselves. Fiber adds to the thickness of the mucus layer. Fiber also is responsible for the production of the short chain fatty acids, which, by the way, we mentioned these things with exercise too. But fiber is responsible for the production of the short chain fatty acids that create the tight junctions. And tight junctions are these proteins that hold the cells together. So every 3 days, you rebuild the entire wall. And when you rebuild the entire wall, you need the cement to hold those cells together. And we get that from the consumption of fiber. And this is part of the reason why, again, I come back to, we have a fiber crisis in the United States. 95% of Americans are not getting enough. So every 3 days, when they go to revise their gut ecosystem, or I'm sorry, go to revise their gut barrier, they don't have the tools that they need to really do it the right way.
Comes back to fiber, people, and not just a fiber supplement or one fiber, but the variety of fiber.
Yeah, I think the variety of fiber ends up being important. And then the other thing is we talked about fermented foods, like you mentioned the lassi, and a lassi is like I'm on board. It's a fermented food. This counts, but you could also include things like sauerkraut and kimchi and kombucha. But there's now evidence that fermented foods reduce inflammation.
Hmm.
So when we're talking about this place, if we're zooming in for a moment, you're going to see the microbes, you're going to see the gut barrier, and then you're going to see the immune system. They're all right there. And if we want to elevate these three things, the microbes, the barrier, and the immune system, fermented foods and fiber, that is the way to go. Those two things.
Love that. So memorable. FNF, fermented foods and fiber. Does stress, I mean, it feels like it would, but is there evidence that stress has a negative effect on our gut microbes or gut health in general? And I want to go one step deeper and ask that in a more nuanced way because something we're hearing more about now is good stress and bad stress. Not all stress is bad. Sometimes, you're working hard on something, it feels stressful, but it's a good kind of stress because you're working on something that you feel has meaning, you're building something off meaning. So, is there any research looking at stress and its impact on the gut microbiome or gut health in general? And are there differences in the kind of stress and how it would impact the gut?
There are clear differences. The concept that you're talking about is called hormesis. And
Mm.
this concept of hormesis is basically to say that something that is bad for you when you get way too much of it all at once is in fact good for you in small amounts because it helps you to fortify yourself and grow stronger. So it's not just stress that can be bad when it's way too much. Exercise can be bad when it's way too much, but it's great for you when it's just right. And the same can be true even of fiber. Way too much fiber all at once for a person who can't handle it. Not good. But when it's the right amount, it makes your gut stronger and you can build from that place. So now when it comes to stress, this is very clearly established, and it goes back actually my one of my mentors, his name is Doug Drossman. He is a professor of both medicine and psychiatry at the University of North Carolina. And he's been talking about this since the 80s. And there were times when people said he was crazy
Hmm.
because basically he was saying that gut issues came from stress and from the brain, and that it was the brain gut axis that explained people having irritable bowel syndrome. And he's completely true. And it just took us decades to prove that this is in fact the case. That the stress, when we carry excessive amounts of stress, which by the way, like how you quantify that is highly individual.
Hmm.
But when we take on excessive amounts of stress, it activates a stress response in our body, which is basically the sympathetic nervous system, putting us into fight or flight mode. Fight or flight, right? Are you going to stand there and stand your ground, or are you going to run and climb a tree? Either way, you got to get fired up. And well, like there are many times on our like a day-to-day basis that we don't actually want our body to get that fired up, but the stress puts it upon us. You could get triggered by something. You could open up social media and see something that really upsets you these days. And that by itself activates this response. And when it does, it comes with a compromise. So you empower certain parts of your body, but the expense is your gut.
Mm.
And it's not a coincidence that when we face stressful situations, where do we feel it? We feel it in our gut. Many people, they get a nervous stomach, or they may get cramps or waves of pain. And that's just one of the ways that you can manifest your stress response in a short term setting. But when you take a person who, for example, has chronic stress, whether they come from a stressful environment, PTSD, or some sort of traumatic event, and you take that person who has unresolved stress that's chronically there, and I guess the right word would be festering, like it's an open wound. That person ultimately will develop a digestive related condition, and many times I would be taking care of them. And what I would find is that like, they could do everything right. They could do it by the book: eat the right food, sleep, exercise, meditate, all these things, and yet they're not getting better. Why? Because the issue is not just what you eat or your sleep or your exercise or meditation. The issue for that person is that the way that they heal is actually by healing from this trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not as simple as just changing what you eat. And so, but if you can heal that trauma, for me, what I did, that's not my expertise. I would empower them by bringing awareness to this connection between stress and the gut. It's important for people to hear this, the listeners to this podcast hear this, and to understand that if you are struggling with something in your life that's giving you tremendous stress and simultaneously struggling with, for example, a gut related issue, one of the massively beneficial ways to heal your gut is actually to find a way to address the stress. And how you go about doing that really depends on the situation and the specifics.
Mm-hmm. But super important to see the connection there. Probiotics, Will, are you a fan? Should people be taking them like daily?
I'm a fan of the nuanced conversation around probiotics. Like I think that when we make quick statements like they're good or they're bad, like we're kind of missing the whole story here. So probiotics have clear benefits for specific situations, but it depends on the individual person. So like as an example, there's probiotics for constipation, there's probiotics for irritable bowel syndrome, there's probiotics for ulcerative colitis. We talked about probiotics for eczema and a number of other things. You have to find the probiotic that, number one, has been studied for the specific goal that you have in mind. The second thing is there has to be like a trial and error element of this. You try the probiotic and you see what happens. And if you feel better and you notice improvement, like there has to be something that's measurable. If you see improvement in that thing, then you know. But if you try it and it doesn't work for you, it may just be that specific probiotic is not matching your gut microbiome because you are unique. And that's okay. But if you're not getting the benefit from it after 1 or 2 months, it's time to move on.
Mm-hmm. So basically, what you're saying is they could play a role, they could help, but it's not a one size fits all solution, requires some trial and error. And maybe it's not something you need to be on forever. Maybe you need it as an acute intervention until things kind of come back into balance. And then your overall dietary and lifestyle pattern is enough to sustain that healthy ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way of saying it, I completely agree that like sometimes what you're doing is basically using the probiotic to temporarily give you that booster benefit that you're looking for while you work on these other things and build momentum with your gut. And then when your gut is in a better place, you may not need it.
Antibiotics and probiotics. A lot of people, when they take antibiotics, they immediately try to find a probiotic and take them simultaneously. Good idea, bad idea.
Good idea for some, bad idea for most. So there are some people who have a history of an infection called Clostridioides difficile or C. diff. And this is an infection that tends to occur after antibiotics. And if that's the case, then taking the probiotic while you're on antibiotics and after the antibiotics can reduce the likelihood of you having that condition. An example of a probiotic that's been known to be beneficial in that particular context is Saccharomyces boulardii. So Saccharomyces has been like clinically studied and proven to be beneficial when people are taking antibiotics. That being said, the majority of people I don't think, need actually to take probiotics based upon a study that was done in Israel where they demonstrated that people who were taking probiotics after antibiotics actually took longer to recover their gut because in a way the probiotic was blocking their own microbes from recovery.
Hmm.
So to me, the choice that people should be opting for instead is to focus on fiber because fiber is the prebiotic. If you focus on fiber, ideally before, during, and after the antibiotics, if you focus on fiber during the entire process, you are helping to elevate those microbes. And then you can basically snap back real quick once the antibiotics are withdrawn.
That's fantastic and super clarifying. And as always, we're back to fiber. This has been so enlightening and edifying. I could pick your brain for days, but yeah, thank you so much for all this insight and wisdom and so many great actionable takeaways. What are you working on that you would love for people to know about? Where can people find you? Tell us, where people can get more access to more of this wisdom.
So you can find me on social media. My screen name is the Gut Health MD. You'll find that on Instagram and Facebook. I am technically on TikTok, but I think like a 14-year-old has taken my handle. So I'm the Gut Health MD underscore on TikTok. You can come to my website, theplantfedgut.com. At my website, you're going to find all the information you're looking for. I have a free newsletter that I'm very proud of. I love when there's cutting edge science. I love taking that science and breaking it down into I guess pun intended, digestible pieces, and then basically sending it out to my community through the email newsletter, because you can really have a nuanced conversation over email. You can't do that on social media. So I would encourage everyone to sign up for my email newsletter. I have courses available. I have a number of different courses, not just on acid reflux, but also on food intolerances, on constipation, or you can take my masterclass, which is my large comprehensive course. So, and the last thing I'm very excited about, and this is all a bit new for me, but one of the things that I struggled with for many years is that, and I mentioned this earlier, that if a person came to my clinic, 95% of the time they would walk out and I would recommend a fiber supplement. And that's because I've seen the benefits time and time and time again. But the thing that I always struggled with is I always felt like the fiber supplements were not what I wanted them to be. I thought that they could be so much better. Part of it was not using the best ingredients. And part of it was the lack of transparency around those ingredients. For example, like wheat dextrin. Do we know that wheat dextrin was not sprayed with glyphosate?
Mm-hmm.
We simply don't. So anyway, I felt compelled to do something about this. This is the exciting part of having a platform, is that you can take on challenges that you think there's an opportunity to fix something and make it better. So I took on the challenge of trying to create better gut health supplements, things that aren't just like run of the mill, but instead have actual human clinical studies to back them up, where what the product is going to do, where I can say with confidence that it's going to provide benefit, and that it's strategically been designed with the person who has gut health issues in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because the other products that are out there, in the vast majority of cases, there's just been no thought, or clearly I was not consulted when they developed their product. So what I've created is a company called 38 Terra, the number 38 and then TERA. You can come to our website, 38terra.com. And basically we are creating next generation gut health supplements that are completely evidence-based. And our first product is called Daily Microbiome Nutrition. You can think of it like you're feeding your gut on a daily basis by taking this supplement. It has 7 unique plants. It has several different ingredients with human clinical trials to prove that it changes your gut microbiome in a beneficial way. And the other thing that's kind of cool is it's low FODMAP. So it's been certified low FODMAP. So if you are a person who has gut issues, you can actually feel really good and heal your gut. Like we were talking about the gut barrier. You can heal your gut barrier, but without having to actually feel bad in the process of doing that. So that's kind of cool.
Oh my gosh. Congratulations. Sign me up. I need it. I'm going to give it to my husband, my kids. Well, I don't know if you recommend it for kids, but it sounds incredible. And I love that it's not just one type of fiber, that it's this kind of milieu and it's like a nourishment for the microbes, and low FODMAP. Genius. Love the name. Congrats. We will link to that in the show notes as well. Super excited for you. And thank you so much again for all the insights, all the knowledge, and I can't wait to have you back on. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Radical Vitality podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss a new episode. It's also the best way to support the show at no cost to you. If you'd like to share your thoughts or feedback, let me know by rating and reviewing the show on your favorite listening app or leaving me a comment on YouTube. Until next time, stay spicy, stay healthy.